Morning, folks. Glad you're here. Hope you're healthy, because most of the folks, it seems, here in San Antonio are under the weather. Flu, cold, ear infections, cough, you name it. It seems to be going around. But so far, I've missed it. It's good for me. You got your Bible. Turn to Romans chapter 8. I know most of you know it. Most of you have heard me speak on it a whole bunch of times. You've heard me reference it 1,000 times. But I don't pick these messages. So here we go again. And we know that all things work together for good to them who love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. I understand, because the Bible is very, very clear on this, that the end result of our Christian life, meaning heaven and eternity with God and so forth, it is virtually indescribable. In fact, the Bible doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail about what heaven is going to be like. Because God just flat out tells us, look, you don't understand earthly things. I'm not going to bother wasting my time with you guys trying to explain heavenly things. You cannot grasp the meaning at your level. And so as good as it is, and as fantastic as it's going to be, as amazing and so forth, he makes it very, very clear that between here and heaven, it might not be all roses and peaches and cream. And one of my big hang-ups with a lot of Christian preachers is that they give this false sense of security. Come to Jesus. All your troubles will be over. Give your heart to God. Everything will be provided for you. Do this and do that, and this and that is going to happen. And then, of course, when it doesn't happen and the wheels fall off, that poor young Christian, or that Christian that's been misled or misinformed, what do? How do they react? And so one thing I've tried in my ministry from day one is to be as brutally honest as I can be. I'll tell you right up front, give your heart to Jesus today. You're going to get to go to heaven, guaranteed. But you're not guaranteed a life free of problems, of sickness, of disease, of immobility. You're not guaranteed any of that. And all the passage here today is telling us is all things work together for good. Let's break it down. Number one, all things. Let's go back even further. Let's go back to the first line here. And we know. This is not a guess. It's not a hope. And we know. This is an assuredness. This is a guarantee, basically, from God. And we know, or we should know. Unfortunately, the way a lot of preachers present this kind of stuff, we don't know. The verse is painted in an entirely different way. Everything that happens to you is for your good. All things work together for good. All things are good. At the end of the day, the guy gets the girl, they ride off into the sunset. Everything is just peaches and cream. All things, for we know. So, okay, no guesswork here. We know that all things, well, what things is that? All things, good things, bad things, indifferent things, neutral things, just regular things, all things, everything that happens in your life, every encounter, every situation, every conceivable scenario that you're in, all things. This is the promise, work together for good. Now you notice, he did not say all things are good. There's where a lot of people, the wheels fall off right there. He says all things work together for good. It's a monster distinction. It's a 180-degree swing here, as opposed to all things are good. When a Christian understands that aspect of this verse, then when the wheels do fall off, when sickness does come, when death comes, when bereavement comes, when the attacks of the devil, we've been speaking the last couple of weeks on, we're in a warfare. Your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand the wiles of the devil. And having done all to stand, stand therefore. We're in a fight. So if you as a Christian understand that by coming to Jesus, you're not taken out of the fight, you are literally being put into the fight. If you know that up front, then you can cope with it, then you can handle it, then you can get it. You're not going to get blindsided by somebody promising you, give your heart to Jesus and all your problems be over. Everything that happens to you is for your good. No, everything that happens to you is going to work for your good. Doesn't mean it's going to be good right now. Some of us might have to wait till we get to heaven before we get that healing that we want. Some of us might have to get to heaven to get rid of that pain that we live with. So if you know that up front, the battle's half won, right there. So we know all things work together for good, and then comes the monster disclaimer. This last part of the verse, hardly anybody emphasizes. But it's integral to the verse. It's part of the verse. It goes hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. We know that all things work together for good to them that love God. So right off the bat, I'm not talking to a non-believer today. I'm not talking to a lost person. If you haven't got Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, if you haven't been born again, just click off and go someplace else, because I'm not talking to you right now. To those that love God. That's part of it. And then the other part, to those who are called according to his purpose. Every promise of God, and I don't mean this in a negative way, and I don't mean God's trying to play games and word games with us and so forth, but every promise, there's a hook in it. Do you love God? Are you called according to his purpose? Now, the first part of that verse is for you. If you don't love God, if you're not called according to his purpose, first part of that verse is not for you. See, a little bit of common sense goes a long way in figuring out what the Bible is saying. There is a promise. We know that all things work together for good. Boom, here's the hook. To those that love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Let me give you an example. John chapter 5. I don't understand the mind of God most times. It's beyond me. It's beyond my grasp. I don't have the IQ for it. I don't have the temperament for it. I don't have the wherewithal to be able to understand God. He makes that very, very clear back in Isaiah when he says, my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. As the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways above your ways, and my thoughts above your thoughts. So I don't get bummed out that I can't understand God, where he came from, how he thinks, how he operates behind the scenes and so forth, how he does what he does. I don't waste any time on that. I'll try to get what I can get, and if it's the rest of it's beyond me, it's beyond me. This is one of those things that's a little bit beyond me here. John chapter 5. Verse 5. And a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. The context is there's a pool in Jerusalem, a specific pool. And at various times of the day, an angel would come down, touch the waters of that pool. And if you're around the pool, looking at the pool, you can see the little wave laps or the little, ripples going back and forth and so forth. You know that an angel had come down, touched that thing, and you knew from experience, you knew from word of mouth, you knew from some revelation from God, you knew somehow, some way, that the first guy that made it into that water, after the ripple started and so forth, they got healed. So word goes out, and over months and years and so forth, I imagine that 24/7, there is just a ring of people around that pool that need healing. And they're eyeballing that thing just 24/7, just fixated on that pool, watching that water. And as soon as they see that water start to ripple, or the little wave laps and so forth start to form on that thing, boom, somebody's in that water. And the first guy that gets in, he gets healed. So he gets off and he goes away. Somebody else takes his place. And it was a fixture there in Jerusalem. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew where it was. Everybody knew what it was for and so forth. So Jesus is walking along there one day, and he happens to be by that pool. That's where this little encounter comes in right here. A certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. Now, my health has been kind of in the bag for, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years. And the last year, just off the table type thing. But 38 years, that's a long time. That's way up into adulthood. When Jesus saw him, lying there, when Jesus saw him lie and knew that he had been now there a long time, in that case, he said unto him, will thou be made whole? It's almost a redundant question, but Jesus always has reasons for everything he does. Will thou be made whole? You would think that the guy might have come back and said, well, hey, I'm sitting here, right? I'm trying to get in that water. Of course, I want to be made whole. So verse 7, the impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man when the water is troubled to put me in the pool. But while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. So he says, yeah, I want to be healed. And when I see the water, I try to get there, but because of my crippledness and my impotency and my lack of mobility, I can't get there fast enough. Somebody else always beats me to it. We don't know how long he's been sitting here, but we know he's been infirm 38 years. Verse 8. Jesus saith unto him, rise, take up thy bed, and walk. So Jesus cuts through all the gobbledygook. He cuts through all the red tape. He cuts through all the angel thing and the rippling of the water. He says, look, just get up. Take your bed and go. My point in this little story here is not to say, oh, if you want to get healed, then you just, dig your heels in, grab a whole bunch of faith, shove it in God's face and say, okay, now you've got to heal me. No, that's not the emphasis here. I'm trying to get at it all. The emphasis is this guy went 38 years. Why? If it was so easy for God to heal him, and it was, all Jesus had to do is just get up, take your bed and go. Why did God wait 38 years to confront this guy and say those words? Do you think at year number 37, let's say, before Jesus came down that road, before he came by that pool, and this guy's sitting there faithfully, we don't know how many years, but he's sitting there and he sees a water ripple, he tries to get down, somebody beats him to it, shucks, he goes back and he sits there, or maybe he tries to get a little bit closer, doesn't make any difference, he just can't seem to make it. Year number 37, let's say, if you would have given him, oh, don't worry. Hey, I've got a verse for you. I've got a word from God. Here it is. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. I didn't think that verse would have gone over with that guy. You see, sometimes we put the emphasis on the wrong thing. God had a reason for letting this guy go for 38 years. One is he made it into the Bible. He's an illustration. He's a talking point. He's a footnote. He made it into the Bible. I'm not in this book. You're not in this book. Now, it took him 38 years of being crippled, but he made it. And you see, his end was better than his beginning. It did turn out for him okay. Another one, John chapter 9. John chapter 9, beginning at verse 1. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. It's even worse than 38 years. Now, I don't know how old this guy was. It says he was a man, though. So we got to assume or infer that he's at least in his 20s, probably older. But he's not a little kid. It says he was a man, blind from birth. Guy never seen a sunset. He never saw his mom and dad, never saw his brothers and sisters if he had any. Never saw his house, never saw the donkey that they put him on to ride him around and so forth. He never saw anything. And his disciples, this is Jesus' disciples, his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Because the prevailing theory and idea in these days was, if something bad happened to you, it's because the judgment and the condemnation of God is on you, because you have sinned. And if not overtly sin that everybody can tell, then you've got secret sin in your life. And this is God's way of punishing you. Some kind of a physical deformity, some kind of an impediment, some kind of a disease, some kind of something. That was a flat out go-to thing, that there was something wrong with you and God. So their natural question was, Lord, who sinned? This guy or his parents? Was he blind? God's trying to get back at the parents for something they did? This is the mindset that they were laboring under. It's the same thing when you go back to the book of Job. The three friends that came to comfort him, they had the same exact mindset. Job, God is hammering you because you're no good. Job, God is hammering you because you've got sin in your life. Job said, yeah, I got a little bit of sin, but I don't have this much sin, not to warrant the junk that's coming on me from God right now. They said, no, you're just in denial. You're wrong. You're a sinner through and through. You're one of the worst sinners ever, because look what God is doing to you. It's the same mindset. And we still have the same thing today in our culture. We see somebody down and out. They didn't work hard enough. They're too stupid. Oh, they're hooked on drugs, or they're into illicit this or illicit that. There's something wrong with them. This is our go-to thing also. So the apple never falls far from the tree here. So the disciples asked him, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents. And he's not talking about absolute sin. They're talking about specific sin that would warrant this type of a response from God, not just being a sinner in general. They're getting very specific here. Jesus answered, neither had this man sinned nor his parents. And here's the kicker. This is the part of the verse that nobody wants to really look at. But that the works of God should be made manifest in him. This guy suffered blindness his entire life for one reason, and one reason only, so that one day Jesus could come by and heal this guy and give him his sight. It took what? I don't know, 5 seconds for the encounter with Jesus? 5 seconds between being blind your whole life and now having perfect vision for the rest of your life, whatever that might be. I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years. I don't know how old this guy lived. And you stop and you ask yourself and you think, are you trying to tell me that for God to make a point, for God to get his point across, that he's willing to let somebody be born blind and stay blind into manhood just so God can make a point? Are you joking me? He couldn't have had some compassion. He couldn't have had some feeling for this guy. He couldn't have had some, sorrow for the guy. No, that's exactly what I'm telling you. God let this man live into manhood without seeing anything, just so he could make a point. And so that Jesus could have an encounter. Jesus could show his godhood. God could be magnanimous to this guy. He could take away all the burden that he had had all of his life. You say, well, boy, that really sounds strange. I don't know. What about the fact that all things, good, bad, and indifferent, all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose? The Psalm says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You're not going to get out of that walk. Every Christian's got to go through that walk. A lot of Christians go through that walk all the time. If you ask them, they seem to be constantly in that walk, the valley of the shadow of death. And what's it say? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because thou art with me. Never says he's going to take you out of it. Didn't say that he's going to prevent you from having to go through it. Didn't say that he's going to just fly you over the valley of the shadow of death. No, you're going to have to go through it. All things work together for good. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because this is the promise. He's with you. And if he's with you, hey, ask the three Hebrew children how that worked out for them. They get thrown in a fiery furnace. Oops. And to their amazement, they come out the other side. Why? Because there was somebody with them. A fourth man walking amongst them in the furnace. Come to find out, gee whiz, it's Jesus. In his pre-incarnate state. Ask Daniel how it worked out. He's get thrown into a den of ravenous lions. They probably keep those lions just on the verge of hunger panic all the time, so that when somebody does get thrown in, boom, they're gobbled immediately. Ask Daniel how that worked out. God didn't take him away from the den of lions. God didn't say, okay, you did it all, and Daniel, now we're going to give you a reprieve, and you're out. Don't worry about it. No, Daniel got thrown in that den of lions. Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is the faith chapter in this Bible. God lists from his standpoint those who he singles out of displaying and having a lot of faith. Beginning at verse 32. Hebrews 11, verse 32. Now, I want you to notice there's two classes of people mentioned here. And what shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, and David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who, through faith, subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Stop right there. That's the first half that he's mentioning. A lot of people displaying a certain level of faith towards God, faith in God. God blessed them to the max. I mentioned the three Hebrew children. We saw fire in here. We saw the den of lions in here, Daniel. Women receiving their dead raised to life again. Samson, Barak, David, all these great men of God. And God blessed them for it. On the spot, basically. That's the first group. Middle of verse 35. There's another group. The women received their dead raised to life again. And here we go. And others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn asunder, were troubled, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. They're all people of faith. They all had the same level of faith in God. They all believed God. In verse 38, of whom the world was not worthy. These were the cream of the crop, folks. You could not accuse any of these guys of not living for God as such and not having faith in God. And God recognized that they had that faith. That's why they're here in this chapter. The world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, this is the key here, and these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. As I said at the very, very beginning of this message, the end of your Christian life, when you go to heaven, it will be indescribably perfect. But the road from here to there, it's going to be fraught with potholes, with detours, fallen roads, washed out gullies, you name it. It is referred to as the valley of the shadow of death. God will not take you out of it. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. How do we reconcile these things? We've got two classes of people here. Both God is bragging on. God is elevating. I mean, God doesn't do this all the time in the Bible. Hebrews chapter 11 is a unique chapter in this book. This is where God is bragging on those that lived for him, that died for him, that did their best for him, and yet in the eyes of the world were maybe failures. I mean, these guys are getting sawn in half. These guys are getting stoned. These guys are getting sent to prison. These guys are dying left and right. They're wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and dens and so forth. They're not the cream of the crop from the world's perspective. And so God says the world was not worthy of these people. And yet we look at somebody and we make certain assumptions. We come to certain conclusions. And if the truth were known, we don't have a clue. We don't have a clue what their relationship with God is like. You remember when Ananias and God were talking? This is right after Paul got saved. And God comes to Ananias and he says, I want you to go baptize him. He is a chosen vessel unto me. I'm going to show him what great things he must suffer. Again, the dichotomy here, the chosen vessel and the suffering. Yea, though I go through the valley of the shadow of death, boom, I'm going to be there with you. That conversation, that was between Ananias and God. Paul wasn't there when God said, he is a chosen vessel unto me. I'll show him what great things he must suffer. Paul wasn't there for that part of that conversation. But at some point in Paul's life, during the stonings, the whippings, the beatings, thrown in with the lions, the shipwrecks, all the problems of the churches and so forth, all the riots that he had to live through, all the chained up in jail, the house arrest, sometime in the midst of all this stuff, it finally dawned on him. That could have been really early up front. I don't know how long he had to endure these type of things before he finally figured out, hey, in spite of what's happening to me, God loves me. God's got my back. He never blamed God for any of these things that happened to him. That's why I think fairly early on he got it. He never blamed God for the beatings. He never blamed God for the whippings. He never blamed God for any of the things that happened to him. We never one time see him even saying, oh God, here they come again. The squad of soldiers, I know it's coming now. I've been here and done that 3-4 times already. They're going to handcuff me. They're going to grab me by the nape of the neck. They're going to frog march me into the dungeon. They're going to lay me out, spread eagle me. They're going to take another cat of nine tails, and they're going to give me 39 more lashes on scar tissue, on top of scar tissue, on top of scar tissue. And he knew, he could read the signs. He'd see the soldiers, he could hear the marching, he could watch the crowd, he could hear the sound. He knew what was coming, and never one single solitary time do we ever see him uttering a prayer like, oh God, get me out of this. Oh God, don't let me happen. Don't let this happen to me now. Oh God, I can't take any more of this. Nothing like that. When God sends a messenger of Satan to buffet Paul on top of all the other stuff, he does go to God at that point and asks God 3 times, Lord, if it be thy will, take this from me, please. And you know what God said? Paul, you know what? You're my prize down here. You're my star pupil, as it were. You have been subjected to more junk, to more stuff, to more bad things than almost everybody put together, I know. And you know what? I'm going to give you a break. I'm going to take this one from you. You've gone more than over the top in proving to me that you love me, that you follow me, that you obey me, that you have my best interest at heart. You've been subjected to everything. You never whimpered, you never cried, you never bitched, you never bellyached, you never got in my face, you never did any of these things. And so on this one, and this is a biggie, this is a messenger of Satan sent to buffet him. What the exact form of that was, we don't know, but we know that with all the beatings that he endured, all the jail time that he endured, all the whippings that he endured, thrown to the lions that he endured, all these other things, he never one time went to God and said, God, get me out of this mess. But this one, he did 3 times. So we can only imagine how bad this must have been for him. What was God's response? No. My grace is sufficient. In other words, I'm not going to let him kill you, but short of that, hey, I'll keep you alive. Paul just bows his head and he says, you're right. You're the boss. And that put to bed that whole thing. God will allow all things to come into your life. Remember the verse said, all things work together for good. All things will come into your life at some point, whether it be sickness, whether it be disease, whether it be a failed relationship, whether it be a career that went haywire, whether fill in the blank. God will allow all things to come into your life. He won't take them away. He won't get you off the hook at the last minute. Go back and read Hebrews chapter 11, verse 35. The promise that we have, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. Promise that we have, I'm building you a home in heaven. If I'm building that home, I'm coming back and I'm going to get you. That where I am, there ye may be also. The promise that we have, God shall wipe away all tears from our eyes. The promise that we have is that when we see him, we will be like him. The promise that we have, you're mine forever, he says. I've taken you and I've put you in my hand. Nobody's going to get you out of my hand. God has taken his hand and put it around my hand. And there's no way somebody's going to get it out of God's hand. What you might have to endure on this earth, what you might have to go through in that valley of the shadow of death, it's not going to be the same as everybody else. Yours might be harder. Yours might be longer. Yours might be tougher. But the promise is, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. You say, well, big deal. No, that is a big deal. Ask the 3 Hebrew kids that went into that fire if the presence of Jesus made a difference in their lives. Duh, of course it did. Ask Job. God got done with Job. He gave him twice as much as he had before. God knew what he was expecting and asking of Job to go through. Job didn't go through that because he was a rotten scoundrel. Job chapter 1, verse 1 says that he feared God. He eschewed evil. He loved God. He obeyed God. Look what happened to him. So when the wheels fall off on you, don't get in God's face. If you've been suffering for this for 38 years, or if you've suffered this all your life, don't get in God's face. If you don't understand why you're going through what you're going through, hey, it's not your job to understand it. God is God. At the end of the day, he'll get you through. And on the other end, you look back, it'll be like it never happened. You're not going to harbor the resentment. You're not going to harbor the regrets. You're not going to be saying, oh, gee whiz, and, I lost 38 years of my life, or gee whiz, I never got to see, this sunset, or I never got to see the face of my little baby, or I didn't get to do this, or I didn't get to do that. God, in his capacity as God, has the capacity to wipe all tears from your eyes. No more sorrow. No more worry. No more sweat. He is God. He knows what he's doing. Heavenly Father, I do a message like this, and I know who it's for. I can have certain people in mind for certain parts of it here and there. But I'm not that stupid as to not know who the Holy Spirit is speaking to on something like this. And I kind of feel that if I need speaking to on something like this, there's other people who just might be in the same boat. Maybe not the same circumstances, maybe not the same things, but we're all in that same valley. We're still together, walking that same trail. Father, my prayer today is that you give each of us the grace to see these things from your standpoint. We know what they are from our standpoint, and we don't like it. We don't like the pain. We don't like the immobility. We don't like the sickness. We don't like the things that happen in this world. And we go to you and ask for relief, and we come to you in prayer. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And it's in the doesn't work. That's where we find you, Lord. That's where you're laying and sitting. It's in that moment that we cry out to you for relief. And it seems like the heavens are just brass and nothing happens. And it's at that moment that you are shouting the loudest. We just don't see it. We don't hear it. We don't get it because we're so consumed with our wants, with our needs, that sometimes it's hard for us to see you. My guy went 38 years as a cripple. And 5 minutes after Jesus healed him, I don't think he ever thought 1 second about the time that he lost. He was so grateful, he was so happy, he was so contented. Lord, I know that's how we're going to be in heaven. 5 minutes after we're there, forget the pain, forget the inability to be able to do this or that. We're going to be so consumed with joy and happiness and thanksgiving and wonder and excitement and curiosity to just sit there and let you be God for us. Lord, bless your people. Bless those that love you, that are the called according to your purpose. Give them that inner strength and that inner peace, that when the prayers don't come fast enough, or the relief doesn't come fast enough, or the cure doesn't come fast enough, that we can step back and just say, well, God's just not done yet with us. And to suck it up, just like Paul did. Say, Lord, not my will, but thine be done. Give us that grace, I ask in Jesus' name.